Hello, and welcome back one and all. For this installment, just to change things up a bit, I'm going to show you a model that I built back in 2016, which is a full year before I even started this very channel. So, no footage I'm afraid, but please do bear with me on that one. As you can probably tell, it's based rather loosely on the Tatooine desert buildings from the Star Wars movie franchise, and best thing of all, it's built to 1:19 scale, which means it fits perfectly with the classic line of 3 3/4 inch action figures. Keep watching and I'll show you how this fun little project came together.
Mos Eisley Spaceport. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Cautious indeed, Obi-Wan, especially as I'm using Lucasfilm footage here, so let's see how far I get before a copyright strike lands on my doorstep and the mere pennies of monetization that I might receive for this little video get handed over to the desperately underfunded and cash-strapped Disney Corporation. So, wish me luck everyone, because, wait for it, I've got a bad feeling about
They're
this.
up for sale if you want them.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
The idea for this project came about when I saw my son playing with his vintage Star Wars toys. It occurred to me at the time that what he could really do with is some kind of diorama to put it all in, not only because it would give him something extra for the figures to interact with, but it would also afford him a more interesting way to display the toys when he's not playing with them. To be honest, I really didn't want to slavishly replicate any of the existing structures from the franchise, such as the all-too-obvious Lars homestead as seen in Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. No, what I really wanted to do was to use a bit of creative freedom and come up with something new, but something that would sit comfortably within that already established world. In the end, I settled on the idea of some kind of grungy repair shop for spacecraft, robots, various bits of machinery or technology, something probably found somewhere on the extreme outer rim of Mos Eisley, and only used by those who really want to evade the evil empire. Google image search helped to kickstart the project with pictorial research, and so I selected a handful of photographs that best suited the design ethos that I was after, and those that really held were pictures of the abandoned original set as they currently look today, slowly crumbling away as nature reclaims and consumes them. What I was particularly drawn to in a number of these images were the darker toned, almost orangey brown coloured buildings that sat in stark contrast to the surrounding sand and other similarly coloured buildings. To me, these really conveyed the idea of decay and neglect that I was aiming for, as opposed to those that were painted with a pristine coating of white finish. Having looked at all the available reference pictures and come up with a rough sketch that I felt best represented all the prevailing design cues common between all of the structures, the next most obvious thing to do was to just get on with it and start building. In an effort to keep things simple, I decided that the main structural elements would be fabricated from high-density insulation foam that I picked up from a local DIY store. Not only was it lightweight, but it could also be cut and shaped quickly with a retractable blade, then assembled and glued together with builder's grab adhesive, thus making the entire turnaround on this stage quite expeditious. Throughout the blocking phase, I continually referred back to my son's toys just to ensure that everything looked in proportion, and at one point I even utilised our kitchen colander as a proxy for the domed roof element that I wanted, before I committed to the idea and ordered a polystyrene hemisphere of a similar size. During a period of downtime while I waited for that dome to arrive, I decided, just for the fun of it, to cobble together some form of workshop machinery out of various everyday objects, such as pieces of Lego, an unmodified toy car from a Kinder Surprise egg, the remnants of an Earth Mover toy, and a whole host of other scraps that I just happened to have laying around. After a quick spray of grey automotive primer and then topped off with a pass of matte black, the entire concoction was instantly transformed into something that was fairly pleasing to the eye, and above all, didn't reveal its true and rather mundane origins. As an interesting side note, I showed this very image to a number of my friends and family members and asked them if anything about it looked oddly familiar. I have to say that not one of them noticed the very obvious toy car at the centre of this piece, or any other part for that matter, which just goes to show that common or garden objects, when assembled together out of context, can be really rather deceptive, a fact that goes a long way in our favour, especially when you're building to a budget. Once that polystyrene dome arrived, during a test fit, I noticed that it sat far too low on the roofline, so I toyed with the idea of raising it up ever so slightly. However, to my eye, this still looked rather odd in relation to the castellated features at the top of the outer perimeter wall, as something seemed to be missing, like it didn't have enough featured detail in this region. To fix this, I added in a recessed secondary wall trim, and this seemed to sit rather well with the rest of the look that I had going on here. In addition to this, I also began to test out the size and placement of a number of support buttresses around the base of the model, to provide a sense of structural relief that broke up the flat planes of the bare walls. Once happy with that, my thoughts then turned to the possible placement of greebly details and ducting, the latter of which made the use of some basic PVC plumbing elbows. Next up, I needed to make a door for the inner workshop bay, as an aperture had already been prepared for it, so now was as good a time as any to address this feature. A couple of scraps of off-cut plastic card were employed here, laid up and scored with panel lines to resemble the design motifs as seen elsewhere in the Star Wars universe. This was then topped off with a surrounding trim made from extruded square rod to hint at the notion that this door could possibly slide open and shut. Maybe the owner of this workshop had repurposed an old door from a crashed Imperial Star Destroyer, or perhaps he stole it from one of their suppliers working on the Death Star. I don't know, who knows? So now I was at a stage where I was almost ready to start sticking all the elements together. However, before I could do any of that, there were a few things that I had to attend to first. One of those things was to soften and round off all the hard edges to create the cracked and crumbled areas of damage, the sort of stuff that underlined the notion that this is an old building, battered and decayed through years of it standing out in the elements. Had I done this whilst assembled, there would always be the risk that I could inadvertently break parts off, in particular the buttresses, so it was wise to perform this pass first, then to stick everything permanently in situ. The dome, however, was a completely different issue in and of itself, all of my own making, I might add. Due to the way that I built the roof, I noticed that I wouldn't be able to reach down to the bottom edge of the dome when it came to adding the texture and the required debris, had I fixed it into its final position at this point, so the only option open to me at the time was to perform this pass independently from the main structure, then to fix it into place afterwards along with all the buttresses. It was at this point that I could start on the main texturing pass to match the finish of the original sets, just as I had done with the dome. To achieve this effect, I took a very coarse, almost sand-like household filler, and applied it with various palette knives in random thicknesses across the entire structure, often coming back with a second and sometimes third or fourth broken pass to accentuate the look of crumbled and flaked off surface layers. This is a technique that I've used quite successfully on many projects over the years, including on one of my full-size TARDISes that I built back in the early 2000s. The nice thing about it is that it's cheap, easy to produce, and the results are always rather convincing. Just as with the dome, the door in the workshop bay had to be worked on prior to its final placement, as once set into position, I knew that I wouldn't be able to reach it well enough to paint it, let alone add in all the chip details, the weathering parts, all the rust effects that I wanted it to have, so this was done now purely for the ease of access. With the door completed and set firmly into place, I could now finally glue the entire structure down onto an appropriately sized piece of 9mm thick MDF that would not only give the entire assembly some structural rigidity, but would also prevent it from warping over time. This was then suitably textured and blended in just like the rest of the construction and treated as if it were a hard standing that the workshop had been built onto. In addition to this, debris was scattered around the base of the structure using various grades of fuller's earth and model railway ballast to really help sell the realism. After all, if the stucco was peeling off the walls due to age and exposure, then it doesn't just disappear, it has to go somewhere. A little tip here, just the tip mind and only for a minute. If you can't find fuller's earth, try using cat litter. It's generally the same stuff depending on the brand, and you can grind it into varying grades to your heart's content. However, just make sure that it's the fresh stuff that you're using and not the used variety, unless of course you want some extra texture and you're really that hardcore. And so we reach the fun bit, the moment that all builders love, myself included, and that's the painting stage. I bought myself some cheap emulsion paint, the same kind that you use for interior decorating, and I made sure that it was of an appropriate colour that best matched the shade that I was aiming to replicate. I then blended in a few other colours as well to really nail down that base tone that I was aiming for. Once that was brushed on, I darkened the mix for shadow tones and lightened it for the highlight pass, and together this achieved a naturalistic mottled effect that the full-size sets seemed to have as well. Remember, in real life, things are seldom one uniform blanket colour. There's always tonal variations to it no matter where you look. Over this I applied a few darker filth washes to tie the colour values together. This was mixed to watery consistency from black and brown artist acrylic paint, and then dabbed off with a rag to really help sell the weathering that the building had accumulated over time. The final step was to add a pass of dry brushing with an off-white emulsion to replicate the look of what was left of the flaked white paint that a lot of these buildings had. and that was about it really. Saying that, there's still much to be done with this model before I can truly call it finished. For example, the weathering has still yet to be finalised, and there are a number of elemental set pieces that ought to be added in as dressing to really bring the thing to life. However, there is one really simple item that's currently missing that I'd really like to make for it, and that's one of those segmented door liner surrounds that a lot of the Mos Eisley sets appear to have. I just feel it's one of those types of details that you'd really notice if it were not there. In addition to that, what may also be a good idea is to perhaps have a piece of technology sat within the interior hallway, rather like that one you see when Luke, Obi-Wan, 3PO and R2 visit the cantina at the start of A New Hope. Lastly, I feel that there simply has to be various wall-mounted greeblies adorned here and there just to really accentuate the Star Wars vibe that we've got going on here. And thinking about such things, I'm keen to fabricate some kind of cobbled-together moisture evaporator, as well as some sort of engine that can sit on the side wall that perhaps in this world supplies the site with power. To be frank though, there's a whole host of extra things that I could make for this piece, but alas that's all for another time and perhaps another video, if of course you're interested. So for now then, that's how the model stands. Thank you so much for joining me, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, and if you care to help the channel out, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and also, don't forget to hit that notification bell as well, so you're always informed when I next upload. Until then, take care, and I'll see you in the fullness of time.